Hi everyone, I'm Tom Fletcher and welcome to another book club bedtime story. I hope you're sitting comfortably because this week we're going to be reading Beetle Boy by M.G. Leonard. Chapter 1. The Mysterious Disappearance of Bartholomew Cuttle. Dr. Bartholomew Cuttle wasn't the kind of man who mysteriously disappeared. He was the kind of man who read enormous old books at the dinner table and got fried eggs stuck in his beard. He was the kind of man who always lost his keys and never took an umbrella on rainy days. He was the kind of dad who might be 5 minutes late picking you up from school, but he always came. More than anything else, Darkus knew his dad was not the kind of father who would abandon his 13-year-old son. The police report stated that the 27th of September had been an unremarkable Tuesday. Dr. Bartholomew Cuttle, a 48-year-old widower, had taken his son, Darkus Cuttle, to school and gone on to the Natural History Museum, where he was the director of science. He greeted his secretary, Margaret, at 9:30, spent a morning in meetings, discussing museum business, and eaten lunch at 1 o'clock with an ex-colleague, Professor Andrew Appleyard. In the afternoon, he'd gone down to the collection vaults, as he frequently would, by the coffee machine where he'd filled his cup. He'd exchanged pleasantries with Eddie, the security guard on duty that day, walked down the corridor to the vaults, and locked himself in one of the entomology rooms. That evening, when his father didn't come home, Darkus alerted the neighbours and they called the police. When the police arrived at the museum, the room Dr. Cuttle had entered was locked from the inside. Fearing he may have suffered a heart attack or had an accident, they produced a steel battering ram and smashed the door open. The room was empty. A stone-cold cup of coffee sat with some papers on the table beside a microscope. Several Coleoptera specimen drawers were open, but there was no sign of Dr. Bartholomew Cuttle. He had vanished. The vault had no windows or no doors other than the one he'd entered by. It was a sealed chamber with a controlled atmosphere. The puzzle of the disappearing scientist made the front page of every newspaper. The unsolvable mystery drove journalists crazy, and not one of them could explain how Dr. Cuttle had got out of that vault. "Scientist disappears," headlines screamed. "Police are foxed," newspapers cried. "Orphan boy placed in care," they reported. "Hunt is on for only living relative, famous archaeologist Maximilian Cuttle." And the next day, archaeologists lost in Sinai Desert. "Boy alone," they wailed. Outside the foster home, journalists stopped Darkus in the street, taking pictures and shouting questions. "Darkus, have you heard from your dad? Darkus, is your father on the run? Darkus, is your dad dead?" 5 years earlier, when his mother died, Darkus had retreated inside himself. He stopped playing out with his friends or inviting anyone over. His mum, Esme Cuttle, had been taken away suddenly by pneumonia. The shock was terrible. His dad was overcome with grief. Some days, blue days, as Darkus called them, his father lay in bed and stared at the wall, unable to speak, tears rolling down his cheeks. On the bleakest blue days, Darkus would bring tea and biscuits and sit beside his dad, reading. It was double hard, losing mum and dad, being so sad all the time. Darkus had to learn to take care of himself. At school, he got along with everyone, but he didn't have close friends. He kept himself to himself. The other children wouldn't understand, and he wasn't sure he could explain it. The only thing that mattered was taking care of Dad and helping him get happy again. Finally, 4 years after Mum's death, the blue days got fewer and further apart, and Darkus watched with cautious joy as his father awoke from his long sleep of sadness. He became a proper dad again, playing football on Sundays, smiling at Darkus over the breakfast table and teasing him about his unruly hair. No, Darkus was sure his dad wasn't suicidal, or on the run, or living a double life. Something else had happened in that vault, and that made him sick to the stomach with fear, because he couldn't think what that something else could possibly be.